say, what a laid-back guy. What a confident, laid-back guy. And he's a nice guy to be with. Whereas his younger brother, Frodo, who was trying to take over the top position, was perhaps not as bright, much more insecure, aggressive, and everybody hated him, even the other chimps.
I think anyone who has worked with a population of chimpanzees over time comes to think of them in terms of their individual variation to the same extent that we do with human beings. And just about any adjective that you could apply to a human being, you could apply to a chimpanzee. I have no doubt that chimpanzee personality is just as important in their daily lives as it is in ours. There are extroverts, there are introverts. There are chimpanzees that have too much confidence and those that never will have enough confidence, and that's reflected in where they end up in the dominance hierarchy, for example, or what their social lives look like in terms of the social circles they move in.
Consciousness, intelligence, personality. These are powerful ingredients. Put them together and you have the recipe for a leap to an entirely new level of behavior.
There's so much resistance to the idea of animal culture that you'd almost think that it's an idea whose time has come. Culture is socially transmitted habits or information. So not genetically, it's not inherited necessarily, it's socially transmitted. And as a result, one group can become different in its behavior than another group, because if you transmit behavior all the time and it accumulates and so on, this group is going to act quite differently than that group. So even two groups of the same species in very similar environments may be behaving quite differently.
What we're talking about is behavior patterns that are acquired typically by one generation watching the experts in the generation above, perhaps their parents, perhaps others in the group. So by culture, we mean the passing on of traditions.
Chimp researchers across Africa started comparing notes. They realized that key behaviors like nut cracking were performed in different ways at their various study sites. At the Thai forest in the Ivory Coast, chimps crack open palm nuts using a wooden hammer and anvil. While at Bossou in Guinea, the chimps do the same thing using stone tools, even though both groups have exactly the same raw materials to hand. In other places, there are yet other local variations on the nut cracking tradition. Ant dipping is another use of a tool showing cultural variation from place to place.
A chimpanzee over in West Africa in the Thai forest will go and take a short stick and just dip them onto the ants like this. A few of the ants come up and the chimpanzee will then just bite those off. It has to do it very carefully and quickly so it doesn't get bitten by the ants. But they just use this little stick, and they do that in one or two other places as well. Now in just one place actually, the Gombe Stream Reserve, Jane Goodall's research site, they use a long wand like this, maybe a metre long, and they very carefully they select that, we can still work with this, and they'll dip this onto the ants until a huge number swarm up. And then once the ants are right up along the stick, they use their other hand to swipe along it so that there's a big ball of ants here, and then they frantically eat those, of course, because the ants are going to eat them if the chimpanzees don't get them first. Now, it turns out that that's much more efficient. It's about 4 times more efficient, in fact, than the simpler method that occurs elsewhere. An analogy to the sticks I just told you about is the way we use utensils to eat our food. In the West, we have a knife and fork. In the East, people might be using chopsticks. And for us, that's very difficult to do. It may even seem as if it's not quite so good. But in fact, for some foods, it's really efficient and much better.
Numerous traditions, at least 50 at the last count, have now been recorded. All of them learned socially. Pestle pounding softens up the heart of a palm tree for eating. A sponge made from leaves makes it easier to get water from awkward places. Fruits can be smashed open on rocks. A leaf wipe is handy for those personal hygiene moments. Fishing for algae in the local pond. The more the chimp researchers look, the more they find. But how are these traditions passed on from chimp to chimp? A familiar ape ability seems to play a crucial role.
Perhaps the tendency to copy others is a drive in the sense that it has an intrinsic reward to act like others. Chimpanzees are born imitators, they're born copiers of behavior. So if you take a broom and you clean the floor, as for example caretakers at the zoo do all the time, you give the same broom to the chimp is going to clean the floor with it, so the chimp will copy the behavior that it sees.
It's difficult to see how that can be being passed on by anything other than some kind of imitative act. So it's as if the chimpanzees in the Thai forest have really never thought about this and not invented this clever technique. It has been invented at Gombe and it's passed on from generation to generation by chimpanzees actually watching this clever trick.
It's a sort of education by master apprenticeship. So the master, the mother, is doing the nut cracking, and the apprentice very carefully look at the mother from the beginning, and in a short distance, very close distance, looking at the mother's face, nuts, mother's face, nuts, mother's face, nuts. So this is a way of learning. Such a kind of education of master apprenticeship remind me of sushi master and apprentice. So in the case of sushi master in Japan, making very good sushi, but the apprentice is not allowed to even touch the rice, fish, or utensils, just allowed to watch carefully for 2 years, 3 years at least. Then one day, the apprentice is allowed to do making sushi, and he can do it very well.
Chimps have a very strong tendency to want to be like the rest and want to act like the rest, just like people, I think. For example, peer pressure is basically that phenomenon, is that you want to act like the rest of your group. And I think that's very important and is by itself a very important motivation for a lot of the behavioral copying that we see. And so you may see, for example, young chimpanzees trying to crack nuts. They're incapable of doing it. They're following all the right movements in the stones, but they're still not capable of doing it. And for a couple of years, without any rewards, they keep showing that behavior that their mother is showing. And so it's all part of wanting to be like her. And at some point it will pay off, but by itself it's already reinforcing to be acting like someone else.
There are intriguing similarities with our own human culture. A female from a neighbouring group arrived at Bosu with a new tradition. She was able to crack open a particularly large, hard nut called the kula, using a bigger stone than usual. The others didn't know how to do this, but were apparently eager to learn the new skill. Observation was critical. Tradition from one place was being introduced to another. And, just like us, it's hard to teach an old ape new tricks. This youngster has learned how to crack open palm nuts, presumably from her elders, even though her own mother can't do it. She came here as an adult from a neighbouring community which didn't have the nut-cracking culture. The youngster provides her own mother with the rewards of learning. Chimp traditions aren't limited to the use of tools either. They've spread into the realms of social manners and etiquette. The so-called grooming hand clasp is a striking example.
The classic form that we described in the 70s was palm-to-palm hand clasp